Alors, bonjour à tous. On va commencer tout de suite.
We'll begin immediately. This is meeting number 35. We're dealing with supplementary estimates. We have the pleasure of having Mr. Matthews with us today, Comptroller General of Canada, and he's accompanied by Marcia Santiago, Executive Director, Expenditures Management Sector of the Treasury Board Secretariat. We'll be looking, of course, at the supplementary estimates, and we'll also be looking at the performance reports. After that, we'll be open for questions on behalf of all the members present. So first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Matthews for his attendance, and I'll cede him the floor immediately for about 10 minutes or 15. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the members of the committee. We're pleased to be here this morning to discuss the Supplementary Estimates B for 2014-15. As usual, we have a brief presentation to give you the general trends and highlights of the budget. I'm accompanied by Ms. Marcia Santiago, who is well known to the committee as well.
That I have changed jobs. I am now the Comptroller General of Canada, but I'm, I guess, here for my last time in my old role. Mr. Brian Pagan is with us this morning behind me, and he's replacing me in that role, in my old role. He is on day 4 in the job, though, so he is just here to observe today, and the next time around you will be very well served by Mr. Pagan, and Marcia Santiago will be here as well. So I just thought I would highlight that for the committee members before we start. As for the presentation itself, if we could start on slide 3, I do hope all the members have received a copy of the presentation. And the goal here is just to give you a quick summary of what's in the Supplementary Estimates B, hopefully give you some information to allow you to focus your questions. I do note, Mr. President, that we have 2 members that I haven't seen here before, so I do know that estimates are a little complicated. So if there are questions about just how estimates work, we're happy to take those as well, and any of the content we have here. So if I could start you on slide 3, this is just a reminder on the organization of the estimates documents themselves. They do start with an introduction, and in that introduction you will, which starts on section 1, page 10, you'll get a sense of the current year authorities of each department, but you'll also get a sense of the previous year's authorities and actually what they spent in the previous year. So if you're actually looking for a quick kind of summary of the estimates, that's a very good place to start. You'll get a department by department list. In that introduction section, you will also find the largest items that are being voted on or will be voted on in the supplementary estimates, so that's a good place to look as well. And any structural changes that are in the estimates. So these estimates, Supplementary Estimates B, we have some structural changes around the administrative tribunal support services. And lastly, the thing I will highlight for you in that introductory section is a listing of the horizontal initiatives. And horizontal initiatives are any initiative where multiple departments are receiving money to jointly collaborate on delivery of something. So some of those you will have seen before, some are new, but they're multiple department initiatives. The second big section of the estimates document is the details by organization. That represents by far and away the largest section of the document, and it is department by department outlining just what the new authorities are being granted for or being requested for. There are 63 organizations covered in these Supplementary Estimates B. If you're wondering why that's not all departments, it's not like the main estimates where we do see all organizations. In the supplementary estimates, we only see the organizations that are requesting new funds, so that's why we only see 63. The annex to the Supplementary Estimates B document, you'll actually find the proposed bill that will eventually be voted on to grant supply. And lastly, a reminder that online you can find additional information including allocations of central votes, allocations by program, and other types of information that might be of interest to committee. Page 4. Quick reminder here that what we're looking at in these Supplementary Estimates B is $2.9 billion in voted spending for 63 organizations. We also have $327 million in statutory adjustments, which I will speak to in a few moments, for a total of $3.2 billion, all budgetary. I will highlight for members that non-budgetary, we do have two $1 items here where we're just actually changing vote wording or things like that. And a reminder to members that non-budgetary is things like loans, where if all goes as planned, there is no impact to the fiscal situation of the government. If you show a loan and it gets repaid, there's no impact. But all of the real dollars here are budgetary in nature. Slide number 5, we do like to take a few moments to compare these supplementary estimates to previous in terms of totals and to situate members in terms of where the spending is at for the current fiscal year or where the authorities are at for the current fiscal year. Supplementary estimates B is always the biggest of the three supplementary estimates. You will notice that it is smaller than last year's supplementary estimates B. And if you're wondering why that is, last year's supplementary estimates B was unusually large. We had a few items in there concerning disaster financial assistance, as well as a Manouche settlement and another out-of-court settlement. So this year we're returning back to a more normal level of supplementary estimates B. The overall trends we've spoken about at this committee before. Trend is that voted spending is going down. That's largely to do some of the reductions that have been taking place. Statutory spending is going up, and it is going up at a greater rate than voted spending. If you're wondering what is driving the increases in statutory spending, it's the same story we have spoken about before here. Legislated increases to the Canada Health Transfer, as well as the old age security programs and the aging population are causing the statutory amounts to increase. And again, for new members, if you're looking for an explanation of voted versus statutory, we're happy to get into that. Slide number 6, I will just hit the highlights for you here on the major voted items, and that they occur on slides 6 and 7. These 11 items we list here cover off roughly 60% of the voted spending in Supplementary Estimates B, so it's the vast majority. The two largest items belong to national defense. And so the first item in here for $652.2 million, that relates to maintenance dollars for the Chinook, as well as for the frigates, submarines, and armored vehicles, in addition to some money for some training exercises in the Arctic, as well as live fire exercises. The second item on this list is national defense as well. That's the final payment related to the Manouche settlement, and there's $190 million in there. That represents $50 million as a cost of living adjustment, which is the final piece, as well as $140 million to replenish the reserve of the insurance company that had actually flowed the funds. Other things I should mention on this slide, and I will not go through the whole list, but happy to take questions. The Treasury Board Secretariat compensation adjustments. These are transfers to departments and agencies for salary adjustments based on the last round of negotiations, $151.7 million. I'll highlight that for you because we haven't seen that large an amount here for quite some time because of the operating budget freeze that was in effect. So under the operating budget freeze, departments had to resource any salary increases out of their existing reference levels. The freeze was not in effect for the fiscal year 2013-14, so we are resourcing departments for any of the wage increases that were negotiated during that year. So that comes into their reference levels for the current fiscal year. And there's a number of agreements in there, but basically $112 million there is for the core public service, $40 million is for separate agencies, and the agreements in there are everything from correctional officers to financial officers, ship repair, east and west, so there's quite a list in there. Lastly, I'll highlight via rail for you, capital rebuilding of enhancing passenger cars, as well as tracks and signaling systems. Slide 7, I will highlight for you a couple of others. At the top of the list, the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority. That's for implementation of enhanced non-passenger screening. So this is for airport staff, airline staff, baggage handlers, etc., to improve the screening of those types of people. So there's money in there for that. The second item on this list, we have 9 organizations receiving funding, and you'll see that item again in the horizontal, for management and remediation of federal contaminated sites, which is an item we've talked about here before, $80.2 million there. Then I'll skip down to the bottom 2 maybe. Canadian Heritage is receiving some funding related to the Pan American and Para-Pan American Games. There is funding of $65 million in there for 3 venues that are being constructed. And lastly, Parks Canada is receiving some funding for improvements to highways and bridges and dams. Two I will highlight for you is the Crow Bay Dam as well as the highway in Glacier National Park. But there's other initiatives in there as well. Slides 8 and 9, we move on to the horizontal items. So just a few of these. And again, these are initiatives where multiple departments are receiving funding. The first one we've already spoken about, which is the Federal Contaminated Sites. The second item on this list you have seen before, which is the First Nations Water and Wastewater Action Plan. That's both Health and the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs receiving funds in there. Maybe I'll skip down to the Statistics Canada one because there's a bit of a theme here. This is funding for Statistics Canada, which is the fourth one on the list, to develop and test the questions for the upcoming census 2016. Stats Canada is receiving money, as well as Shared Services Canada, because they're receiving funds for the IT backbone that will go with this census. You will see other items on this list where there are funds for Shared Services Canada for the IT component of something a department is delivering. So on the next page, you would see funding for CRA for tax measures. Shared Services Canada is getting some IT funding for that as well. Environment Canada is getting some funding for one of their computers. Shared Services Canada is getting some funding for that as well. So that's a bit of an emerging theme. I think I'll take us to slide 9, and I will just highlight one horizontal item for you there. Halfway down the page, the Canada Food Inspection Agency, new preventative food safety program for fresh fruit, vegetables, as well as enhanced oversight of fish and seafood. This funding is largely because of the changing purchasing patterns of consumers. There's increased purchasing of packaged foods, new markets, more of a trend towards fresh fruit and vegetables, as well as some seafood products. So they've added some new dollars in here for a new program to oversee the food safety there. Slide number 10, statutory expenditures. So these are the expenditures where Finance updates their forecasts periodically. These expenditures are not voted on by Parliament as part of the estimates process, but we do provide the changes for information purposes. So I'll just highlight a couple of them for you here. The payments to the International Development Association of $441.6 million. That is basically a replacement for a program that we used to deliver through a demand note, where now we're actually funding up front with a check. These are loans to the poorest countries in the world that are basically given concessionary or low interest, zero interest terms, and we're just changing the way we actually deliver it. Rather than a demand note, we're actually flowing some funds directly. The other two I will highlight for you are the decreases on the bottom. We've spoken about this before. The interest costs, this brings the forecast in line with the latest forecast from the Department of Finance. Decreased interest costs of $329.7 million. That largely relates to changes in forecasts for the long-term interest rates, which are continuing to be low. And then the second one on here is a reduction in the forecast for disbursements to provinces under the softwood lumber agreement, $80 million. That's worth noting because that brings the current year forecast down to zero. Basically, that the forecast for those payments is very much tied to the health of the U.S. housing market. And if the U.S. housing market is going well, lumber prices stay up and payments here are reduced or nil. And the forecast here, based on the latest economic data, is that there will be no payments required in the current fiscal year. Lastly, just in summary, so $2.9 billion in budgetary voted expenditures, 63 organizations, and again, eventually Parliament will be asked to vote on the Appropriation Act. Maybe one final plea before we get to questions. If your question does pertain to a specific page in the estimates document, if you could give us the page number so we can find the equivalent version in English or French to allow all members to follow along, that would be very much appreciated. And with that, Mr. Chair, we're happy to take questions.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur Matthews, pour votre présentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Matthews. Unfortunately, the last one before our committee in your other title, but it's nice to see some new faces as well. So we'll begin over here with 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
To your being named Controller General, good luck in the future for that. So I mean, one of the fundamental ways that that government has to report to parliamentarians is through this estimates process. And I have to say that I'm rather disappointed with some of the level of detail that we've received, particularly with regards to the defense additions. So we're talking about 652 million, right? And that's going, it would seem, to a number of things, but also just to the implementation of the Canada First defense strategy. In a time of what is war, you would expect that maybe some of these estimates would be tied to current operations. Could you confirm whether or not any of that 652 million will be used in operations or for operations in Iraq currently?
So a bit of background, thank you for the question. So if you think about the timing of supplementary estimates B, these were largely put together before the decision was made for Canada to go and participate in the current initiative that's happening related to ISIS. So, you know, is there any direct dollars in here related to that operation? No. That being said, the way departments are funded, they do get a vote for operating expenses and a vote for capital expenses. And, you know, if there's a need for national defense to move funds around to support, you know, within those envelopes, they are free to do so because they are controlled at a vote level. But to directly answer your question, is there any, you know, incremental funding specifically for that initiative in these estimates? No, there's not.
Okay. And with regards to, well, just switch in French, so just to warn you. Bon, donc selon le budget des dépenses, les
According to the budget documents, we see here operational expenses and support the Chinooks, for example, the maintenance of the submarine fleet, the frigates, aircraft, etc. I'm wondering what is the current condition of each of these 4 submarines in Canada, and what's the relationship between that amount and the maintenance of the submarine fleet per se? Well, thank you for the question.
Defense operates the budget in all departments, so they're given a bulk number for operating dollars. And so they're free to sort of spend that around whether it's submarines or frigates, but we are very much into maintenance dollars here. The condition of the submarines themselves, you know, can I speak to whether we're going to get 5 more years? You know, I can't speak to that. That's actually a better question for the Department of Defense in terms of their plans. You'll be well aware, and members will be well aware, that there's been significant investments over the years on those submarines to get them ready for seaworthiness. And I believe there is still one that is being worked on significantly, and the other one, I believe, has been put out for some trial runs. But best to ask those questions to Defense themselves.
Okay, d'accord. Et puis, quelle part du supplément demandé ira?
Thank you. What part of the supplementary will go to training and personnel support?
No, she does. So it's kind of a gross amount here in terms of the priorities are Chinooks, frigates, armored patrol vehicles, and then the 2 training exercises I highlighted, but there is actually additional training in there as well. But I can't give you the split between the various initiatives.
J'imagine que c'est quelque chose qu'on pourrait vous demander à...
Something, I suppose we could ask you to provide that later. Yes, if it's of interest to the committee. I'd also like to point out that as to the veterans, 70% of the votes will be spent for advertising. So not asking very much for exactly to funeral costs and other issues that is of great concern to the vets. So what are they going to publicize with this 70% of the money?
There is funding in here for advertising related to Veterans Affairs. This funding will be targeted towards raising awareness of Veterans Affairs programs. If you think about the way Veterans Affairs funding is organized, they basically get funding for grants and contributions, which is the programs themselves to the vets, as well as funding for operational dollars. And the funding and the spending on grants and contributions is very much driven by the benefits as well as the number of applicants you get for those benefits. So these advertising dollars are aimed at raising awareness amongst the veterans as to the programs that are available, and that's the plan for those dollars.
Merci, merci, Monsieur Mathieu, Monsieur Avenir. Maintenant,
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews. Now 5 minutes, Mr. Trottier.
Matthews, and congratulations once again on your new role and all the fine work you've been doing over the years with the Treasury Board Secretariat. You gave a very broad overview of spending within all of government, not just the Treasury Board Secretariat. And as much as I'd like to plunge into some details, I think I just want to talk about the longer-term trend. When we studied the estimates process a couple of years ago, we talked about how it's effective for us to look at the longer-term trend as opposed to the quarter by quarter or even just a 1 year's results. And at the same time as the SUPS B, or roughly at the same time, we have the departmental performance report. So I want to ask you some questions about the departmental performance report, because we can look at the annual trend. And in the actual expenditures, just within the Treasury Board Secretariat, we see some significant reductions in spending, and in the categories of management frameworks, people management, expenditure management, and financial management. We see year-over-year decreases in each of those 4 categories. Could you talk about some of the initiatives within the Treasury Board Secretariat to reduce those expenditures? And then there's one item where we see the costs increasing, but I'll ask you that question later. But just in those 4 categories, why were the costs decreasing fairly significantly year over year?
So I think for members who may have brought the departmental performance reports with them, and I don't know if they have, I think you're probably looking at page 8 of the DPR. So you're right. You're quite right. We did provide the overview of the government as a whole, and that's kind of our primary role. And then we'll speak briefly to the Treasury Board Secretariat as a department, which is what the question pertains to. If you look at the policy, Treasury Board Secretary is largely a policy shop, so offering advice and guidance in terms of things like financial management policy and people management policy. Those reductions are largely around consolidating some of the ways we offer policy advice. So we've actually done some restructuring to streamline our policy advice function. There were some programs that were sunsetting, so we had temporary funding that has dropped, and there was sunsetting initiatives that basically ran their course, and they were eliminated. So that's the bulk of it. The only other thing I should highlight for you here, you've touched on the major functions of Treasury Board Secretariat. It is a funny department in that it also has these things called central votes, which are for government-wide purposes, and that's the last or second last bit you'll see on that page. And those numbers are largely things like the payroll I mentioned, government-wide contingencies. So they can fluctuate from year to year. So I don't get too fussed about the ups and downs in terms of those fundings, because they are government-wide in nature. But you've touched on the major themes, and it's been across the board decisions to basically, as I mentioned, sunsetting funding that was winding down, as well as consolidating some of our processes to do our functions more efficiently.
So the last item in the departmental performance report of government-wide funds and public service employer payments, we saw an increase of $2.19 million in 2011-12 to $2.5 million in 2012-13, and then the actuals in 2013-14 were $2.63 billion. So that's because of other departments requesting increased payments for salary adjustments?
That's part of it. Also, the central votes, and I'll just run through them because they are, we don't bump into them a lot. So there's something called Vote 5 that is government-wide contingencies. It was, if I recall correctly, not used at all last year, so the whole amount lapsed, and that's fine. That's only there if we need it. Vote 10 is government-wide initiatives. It's some small money if there's any kind of government-wide initiative we want to fund departments for. Then you're into compensation adjustments, which is Vote 15, and that's the one we spoke about earlier. Then you have 2 votes related to departments' ability to carry forward funds. So for operating dollars, departments can carry forward 5%, and for capital, they can carry forward 20%, and the max amounts for the whole government are included in those central votes. And so they're very much based on what the request departments make. You've got the public sector insurance vote, which is Vote 20, and so Treasury Board Secretariat functions as the employer for the whole of government, so that insurance money is in there. And lastly, Vote 30, which is the pay list requirements, and those are things like benefits related to maternity, et cetera, that drive some of our compensation costs. So those central votes very much depend on government-wide trends. And so they're not specific to the operations of the department per se.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Matthews. And the other very important and interesting part of the departmental performance report is the performance indicators. So there's one thing about controlling expenses, but you're also obligated to meet certain targets. And one of the refreshing things I saw in this year's departmental performance report for the Treasury Board Secretariat is that you actually missed some targets, which to me is refreshing in the sense that I've looked at some of these reports in the past, and not just Treasury Board, but other departments, they seem to hit 100% of their targets, which suggests the targets weren't aggressive enough in some cases. And I noticed there's some targets that were missed in this case, and there's just one, and maybe you can comment on it. It was under the area of expenditure management, program 1.3, which is on page 25 of the version of the DPR that I have. And it said percent of organizations whose year-end expenditures are within the targeted range of planned expenditures, and there's a targeted range of 15%, and you had 80% of organizations would hit those targets, but only 70% did. Now, I'm just wondering, what are the consequences when organizations don't hit their expenditure, their expenditure targets? Does this affect variable compensation for deputy ministers or associate deputy ministers and so on?
A couple of things here. From a parliamentary perspective, departments cannot exceed the amount that Parliament has voted for them. So if you have a department that actually exceeds its vote, there would be significant consequences, depending on the reasons why. In this case, this is more of a best practice case. And you've touched on performance measurement, which is a challenge in government, and it's a big challenge for central agencies. So we're using this as a proxy to say, okay, are we giving departments the right tools and guidance to help them plan and forecast their spending? But at the end of the day, it's the departments who actually manage their own budgets. So this is kind of just an indicator that we've put out there to basically help us decide if we're doing enough to help departments or not. Are there consequences for not being there? No. This is more of a best practice type thing, and departments take note of it, try and do better, and then we look at ourselves and say, okay, are we giving departments the right guidance and tools they need to properly plan their spending?
Merci. Merci, Monsieur Trottier. Maintenant, pour 5 minutes également.
Now, 5 minutes for Madam Dick. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much to the witnesses for appearing today. It's always appreciated, and it's always too brief a visit. I have a question on Via Rail. I don't have the numbers that correspond because I don't have my copy with me this morning, but I'll leave that to you. However, or perhaps those who might be providing us these notes, that they could perhaps put the reference numbers along with the data. With Via Rail, 148.6 million, I believe, for SUPs. This new money are for various projects covering a number of communities for capital costs, improving the rolling stock, the track, and I'll stop on that. Via Rail, is Via Rail owner of the rail beds in Canada, the rails themselves in Canada?
It's CP that owns the rails, and VIA leases them from CP, so I believe there's a charge there. That's my recollection. So VIA is not the owner of the rail track itself. That being said, this funding goes, as I believe I mentioned earlier, and you've touched on.
Excusez-moi, pouvez-vous me dire quelle partie?
Can you tell me what part then of this 148 million will be tagged for maintenance of the rails, of the track?
Passenger cars, signaling systems, and things like that. I'm not aware of anything on track. I believe that's outside them, and I'm actually looking to Marcia.
There is some amount in this for track improvements, but we don't have a precise figure for that.
Okay.
We can get that.
J'aimerais avoir ces chiffres.
Very well. I'd like to have the numbers if I could. In Quebec, I believe VIA rents from CN. VIA is a private corporation, we know that. Does that mean that there's public funds that are going to be transferred to a private corporation in order to repair the rail bed?
Go to VIA, and I'm sorry, I believe I said CP earlier, but I think I'm dating myself here, so it is CN. Thank you for that. VIA would have two choices. They could actually fund the repairs themselves, or they could, in theory, decide to give that money to another organization to do the repairs. So that's a better question for VIA in terms of how they're actually going to spend those funds. Is it themselves or through another organization?
Oui, mais la question se pose à vous au niveau.
But I'd like to know from you as to the money being injected for these remediations. Ms. San Diego said there was some money. Via Rail is actually leasing, I suppose, from CN, and they're be repairing the rail bed that belongs to somebody else. Is that correct? Well, it's a choice that Via will make.
This through their arrangement with another organization. So we'll have to do a follow-up to see what percentage of the funding actually relates to rail repair and who actually owns the rail. We'll do both.
Dans le même dossier de Via Rail, il est...
Under the same heading, Via Rail stations, reparations and remediation of stations, small and large. Are there some train stations that will be, in fact, decommissioned or abandoned?
On repair for existing train stations. This is not funding to abandon existing stations, so it's about repairing their existing asset inventory. So to my knowledge, no, there's not any funding in here related to decommissioning of train stations.
Donc, on peut conclure que la mise hors...
So we might conclude that any decommissioning that may have occurred over the last decades is now ended, there's no more?
For VIA in terms of what they've done for their operational plan. But as I said, there's no funding in here related to decommissioning, but I can't speak to what's been done in the past.
Ici, je vois qu'il y a des...
And I note here that there's some improvements for infrastructure or infrastructure improvements. Can you tell us what category of infrastructure we're talking about here?
Categories around passenger rail cars, the stations themselves, signaling systems on the rail lines themselves. So those are the big three that I would highlight for you.
Donc, il y aura amélioration pour les infrastructures.
So, infrastructure improvements at Via Rail.
Merci. Je voudrais vous parler d'un sujet dont Pat Martin...
I'd like you have 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Well, thank you very much. Put me down for a second round, please. Mr. O'Connor, 5 minutes.
Yeah. Mr. Matthew, the Treasury Board's requesting $151.7 million essentially for salary increases. Yet over the last few years, my recollection is that thousands of positions have been eliminated from the government. And every time you eliminate positions, you're saving money. And I don't want to do the estimate, but we're into hundreds of millions of dollars saved on salaries, etc. Why do we have to provide another $151.7 million when you've already scooped up hundreds of millions of dollars?
Thank you for the question. Couple of points to make here. When the member's quite right, there were reductions made. The biggest one I would highlight is Budget 2011, where there was a goal of $4 billion in reductions set. Those reductions were achieved and departments' budgets were reduced. So we took that money away from departments. Now, life goes on. There's been new collective agreements, some wage increases, if I was to generalize across the board, about 2%. So we're funding departments for those wage increases because we take money away when we make reductions, so their budgets were reduced. When there's increases that departments, are not asked to fund themselves, we give them funding basically to hold them whole and keep them harmless for those wage reductions for the last year. So that's, had we not taken away and reduced their budgets, you'd be quite right. They could actually absorb it, but the fact is departments' budgets were reduced significantly because of the exercises. So now, based on the latest round of negotiations from last year, we're putting some money back into their votes.
Okay, my next question has to do with the Menage class action lawsuit. How much money is involved in this? How much money does the Government of Canada have to pay out? And where are we in the process? How much money have we paid out?
So this is the second and final piece. There was a big piece last year in Supplementary Estimates B, and maybe I'll ask my colleague to see if she can dig out that number. So this represents the final payment, $190 million. $50 million is actually the final negotiated piece around a cost of living adjustment, and then the $140 is actually to reimburse the insurance company because they basically flowed the funds in advance. The total value of the settlements, maybe we can get back to you in a few minutes with that, because I'm sure we have it here somewhere. And this is the last piece.
Okay, my third question has to do with heritage. I see in there's a commitment of $65 million for Toronto, basically, and for 3 facilities in Toronto. Do you know how much money the Government of Canada is committing to the Pan Am Games? And is $65 million what we're committing, or is that just a portion?
$65 million is the portion that's in this Supplementary Estimates B. There has been other funds, I believe, flowed for that event. The $65 million in this case relates to 3 facilities: University of Toronto, York University, and the Velodrome in Milton. So that's what this money is for. But I do believe there may have been some other funds committed in total, but this is just this piece.
Okay, thanks.
And
I have the figures from Manoj. Last year we paid $939 million, and so with this 190, it brings the total up to $1.1 billion.
and that would be the final.
Thank you.
Merci pour l'intervention. Et maintenant, Monsieur
Thanks one again. Now we'll go to Mr. Easter for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and my congratulations to Mr. Matthews on being the Comptroller of Canada. It's an interesting job, I imagine, by times. Oh, and I do want to say that on your presentation, I think you did a good job, you and your people, of drawing out a lot of the areas in a fairly understandable fashion, so I appreciate that. One thing that isn't in here, though, and I'm wondering if you can, if you have that information available or can get it for us, and that's the lapsed spending that was budgeted for. I can tell you, in my critic area, which is public safety, CSIS is lapsing $18.2 million, RCMP $158.6 million, Correctional Services $166.7, and Canada Border Services $194.2. In a time when we're talking security, we find these lapsed money. I'm wondering if you have anywhere a total number for the lapsed money in the budget, and in what areas that is. I'm not saying that you have to answer that now, but if that information can be made available to us, I'd like to see it in total.
Sure, so I'll give it a shot. Thank you for the question. Where you will actually find lapsed funding, and this will get a little complex, is in the Public Accounts of Canada, which I did happen to bring along. So Volume 2 will give you department by department the lapse. A couple of points on lapse, though. Number one, you can't overspend your money. So, some degree of lapse is actually normal. If a department got within 33 cents of their vote, that's a signal that they're running too close to the line. So that is why we allow departments to carry forward 5% of operating and 20% of capital. There's no such automated mechanism on grants and contributions, and that's an important point. So there's no automated rollover of unspent grants and contribution money. The lapse, when you're looking at it, you really have to look at what was driving it. So we differentiate. So the total lapse government-wide, to answer your question, was $7.3 billion. That's down 28% from the previous year. But I'm more interested in something we call the net lapse, which is the unplanned lapse. And that's basically when we look at, departments are given ceilings that they have to respect. Partway through the year, they might come to us and say, you know what, this project's behind schedule. We'd like to see if we can move that money from the current year to the next fiscal year. And Department of Finance would think about it. They'll say yes or no, usually yes. And then it would come back to Parliament to be revoted on the next year, because Parliament votes on an annual basis. So the net lapse is about $4 billion, 3.9. And that's down 13% from the previous year. And that net lapse, and this is the most important point I think I'll leave you with, 93% of that lapse is driven by grants and contributions and the central votes that I mentioned earlier. And the central votes, it's quite normal to have high lapses in there, because you've got things like government-wide contingencies. If we don't need it, we don't need it. The grants and contributions vote, 2 departments in particular made up $1.1 billion of it, and it's quite understandable when you think about it. It's Infrastructure Canada, which they're involved in negotiating agreements with provinces, municipalities. They often slide, so they're always a high lapser, and that's just to be expected. And then the other department I would highlight for you is Aboriginal and Northern Affairs Canada. And again, for the same reason, they're often involved in negotiations with First Nations, and those things do tend to slide as well. The operating dollars, which I think people are quite preoccupied with, whole of government departments lapsed less than their 5% carry forward. So on the whole, they were within the 5%. Now on an individual basis, some were above the 5%, some are below, but that's kind of where we sit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I think each and every one of us in our own ridings would have at one point or another had an infrastructure program lapse and worry about whether the money was going to carry through till the next year. On Gordon's question, really, Mr. O'Connor's question on salaries and the cutbacks, is there and the loss of jobs. I'll lay it on the table. One of my huge concerns is I always find when there's cutbacks, regardless of the political party that's in power, Ottawa tends to look after itself. And the outlying regions seem to be the one that take the brunt of the cuts, and the frontline service workers. And in my humble opinion, I think we have far too many managers and not enough workers. But could you, is there any way you could give us a comparison in terms of, and it's related to Mr. O'Connor's question, a comparison between the total salary for the public service salary, managers and frontline workers in, say, 2011, 2012, as compared to today? I understand completely why you're asking for more money, because those decisions that were made dropped off and we're now back to normal. But I hear that there's 20,000 less public servants, and you hear all kinds of different numbers. In monies, is there any way of getting a comparison between total salaries for the federal government of employees, public service, in, say, 2011, 2012, and this year?
We can get you 2011-12 versus 2013-14 for certain. You know, and I think just to maybe touch on parts of your question, I don't have the comparison with me, but we can certainly get that. The 20,000 jobs eliminated you were referring to was a result of the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, and of that 20,000, we did some analysis on the reductions by province, because you did touch on the regions versus Ottawa itself. And the percentage distribution of jobs before and after those reductions were the same. So there was actually, Ottawa was treated the same way as the rest of the country. So it was an even distribution of the reductions. I can tell you that in the National Capital Region alone, 7,700 jobs were eliminated. So that was, so before and after those reductions, the distribution by province was the same. We'll have to get back to you on the wage bill. I may have it here, but I don't think I do. But if I do, I'll...
Merci, Monsieur Easter. Puis, je rappelle, vu que ça...
Thank you, Mr. Easter. Now, a lot of people have been asking for information, and perhaps we'll advise you, of course, to send that to the clerk so that it can be shared by all the members. Mr. McGuire, 5 minutes.
Congratulations as well. Just in regards to a comment about comparisons between various years, can you explain look at some of the differences between the 14-15 supplementary estimates under Estimates B to the 13-14 Supplements B? I see there's, well, most of the mains and the proposed are even. There's quite a variance in some of the sub-Bs, and I wonder if you could just explain that somewhat more for me.
Sure. Interesting question, so hopefully I can give you an answer that makes some sense. As I mentioned, this Supplementary Estimates B is always our biggest, and the reason for that is, you have a budget in February, Supplementary Estimates A follows close on its heels, and often not enough time to get new budget initiatives into Supplementary Estimates A. By Supplementary Estimates B, you're starting to see, some of the new budget things come about. When you look at Supplementary Estimates B for the current year, it is lower than last year. Last year we were at $5.4 billion in Subs B, and this year we're certainly under that. And I did, would like to highlight for you that last year's was unusually large. So I'm talking whole of government here, The reason last year's was so large was disaster financial assistance, $700 million, which if I remember correctly related to the Alberta floods, was that big chunk of money there. Manouche would be the second piece, which we talked about earlier today. And then Aboriginal Affairs had a large out-of-court settlement last year. So that's why last year's was so big. If you compare the current year, 14-15 to 12-13, those numbers are very much in line. But I don't get too fussed by the amount of supplementary estimates B because, when you look at year-to-date, that's kind of a more interesting total. And the trend is that voted appropriations are going down, largely to do with the reductions the government has made, while the statutory continues to go up. The reason I say I don't get too fussed about supplementary estimates B from one year to the next is sometimes you have a program that expires and it doesn't get renewed in time to make it to the main estimate. So the program's renewed, but it missed the main estimate cycle. So to give you an example, a couple of years back we had the RCMP policing program that is done with the provinces, municipalities, and it didn't make it into main estimates because the deal wasn't basically done in time. So you saw a drop in RCMP and main estimates, and then lo and behold, you come along supplementary estimates, and there's a large spike in RCMP. And it was because that program was extended. It was just a matter of waiting until that deal was reached. So it's I think more relevant to look at the total year to date, which you have asked me to do. And I think I've hopefully made it clear that the voted number is going down largely because of the reductions that are in play. And that's not to say there's not some major items in supplementary estimates B, but I think we've touched on those.
Thank you. Then just to corollary on that, to add some more to it, certainly you're right. The proposed numbers at the end of the year are fairly even. It's just thank you for the description of the differences there. In regards to the statutory and the voted expenditures, there are some differences there as well, and I wondered if both of these items are included in Subs B, and if they are, can you give an example of each from this year's Subs B?
Sure. So for members who may not be familiar with the terminology, statutory spending is the spending that is directly through legislation, where we don't actually put a hard cap on the spending. So a good example is the EI program. If you qualify for EI, you get a check, and that's in legislation, and or I guess you get a direct deposit now, not a check. But so we do our best to forecast those numbers. Same with the old age security payments. But departments basically we spend what we spend, and that's just the way the program works. Voted means departments have to respect the limits there. The increases in statutory spending, and it's an increasing trend in terms of statutory spending going up, largely around the legislated increase to the Canada Health Transfer, which is a significant increase, as well as the demographics for our aging population. So we're having higher increases in old age security programs driving those numbers. So those are the kind of two things I would highlight for you there. In terms of specific adjustments to this year's statutory forecast that we're making in supplementary estimates B, Finance has shared with us that their initial estimate for interest expense for the year is now lower because long-term interest rates have stayed low, as well as the softwood lumber payments they're now forecasting at zero because of the U.S. housing market largely. For voted, I think I would refer members of the committee to slides 6 and 7 just to get a sense of the major items, and I think we've been through them all. But the one the one I would highlight for you is the Treasury Board Secretariat compensation adjustments, just because it's a central vote that's going out to departments, and we've already touched on it, and we hadn't seen that for a couple of years because of the operating budget freeze, or at least not to this extent.
Merci, M. Maguire. Temps est écoulé. Donc,
Time's up, Mr. Maguire, and I'll give the floor to Mr. Hamidon. 5 minutes.
$652.2 million for national defense. I don't know if you have these details or you can provide them to the committee, but I'm just wondering what aircraft or light armored vehicles will benefit from the funding for fleet maintenance directly.
I can speak to some of this. The aircraft in question is the Chinook 147, so that's kind of the funding I'm aware of for the aircraft. In terms of the armored vehicles, I'm not aware of which class, but I believe they're personnel carriers. I don't have any information on what class of vehicle, though.
Okay. And do you know what specific frigates or?
Yeah, the Halifax class frigate is the. I'm not a Navy guy. I apologize. I don't know really much details.
Neither
but
am
it's
I.
okay. Halifax class frigates for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that level of detail. On another subject, the estimates show a further $80 million for remediation of federal contaminated sites, but at the same time, public accounts show that the total federal liability for the cleanup is more around $11 billion. In my opinion, this is mainly because of poor oversight and response with regards to these increasing contaminated sites. So they're throwing $80 million to basically, an $11 billion problem. So what is going to be accomplished with that meager amount?
So a couple of things on contaminated sites. It's an excellent question, and the size of the liability, which the member has mentioned, is important. So understand that when you look at public accounts, and you do have to compare these two numbers, when we get a sense of the environmental liability and agree that the government is responsible or has assumed responsibility, we put a liability on the public accounts, and that's important information, for the public. So 11 billion is the right number. I would highlight for members that some of our biggest liabilities were not actually caused by the government. They're liabilities the government has assumed because the private sector may have walked away. So Giant Mine up north or Faro Mine are two of our biggest. And so there's an interesting history around those ones. When we look at supplementary estimates B, this is an additional amount that's being spent across 9 departments, and there's a mix of what will be accomplished by that. One is actual remediation. And you'll appreciate that the remediation largely occurs during fair weather seasons. Hard to remediate sites in winter in some of our more northern climates, but also ongoing assessments. And I will highlight for members that when we book liabilities for environmental liabilities, they can fluctuate as we get more information. So part of that $80 million goes to assessing sites that have been identified, but you haven't really landed on a detailed plan about how it's going to be cleaned up. And just to give you an example, if you're in a remote area with...
So, sorry, just to interrupt you. So none of this money is going to actually clean up. It's just...
Yes, no, it's a mix. Some is going to assessment,
okay.
Some is going to clean up. It's both, but I did want to highlight that some does go to assessment.
Okay. How much of that goes to assessment?
I think it's about 15 to 20% is the norm.
So 15 to 20% of the 80 million. So already we're dealing with a very small amount, and then we're gonna channel some of that amount to study.
To figure out the plan for the ongoing assessment, because to clean these
Right.
up, you kind of have to keep things in the pipeline. So you need the ongoing assessment, more detailed assessment while you're cleaning up other sites. Otherwise, you kind of dry up in terms of sites you can remediate.
Fair enough.
There is a mix.
Fair enough. Thanks for that. Je vais changer en français pour les interprètes.
I'll switch to French to keep our interpreters alive. 56 million under 1B and 80 million under capital costs 5B. That's the reference I'll be dealing with. Following the SUPs, of course, 214, 215, there's a transfer, internal transfer of $255 million between operating and capital expenditures, particularly for leases, contracts, under the common definition for capital expenditures. Now, the question might be a bit specific, but this 80 million being requested, will it be used to commit to which capital costs, which capital expenses? I presume we're talking about defense here, yes? Yes.
To be approved by Parliament, transfers between votes, actually relates back to an Auditor General recommendation from about 2, maybe 3 years ago. And so this may be a bit, I'll try and be quick. The Auditor General recognized that from departments have capital votes and operating votes, but they weren't being consistent in terms of what got charged to their capital vote versus their operating vote. And we wanted consistency on that front. So the government took note of that recommendation, and they said, let's make the definition for capital vote the same as it is for accounting. So that actually got clarity for definition. But what that meant is some departments had money that in previous years they were charging to their operating vote that really under the new definition is capital. And that's why you're seeing this transfer here, is to conform to the new definition. So D&D has money in one vote that basically under the new definition for capital, they have to move to the other. So to answer your specific question about which capital projects, I can't, but this is really about cleaning up and making our practices consistent.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur Revnia.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Adler, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews and Ms. Santiago, for being here today. I have a couple of questions on the statutory expenditures on slide 10. And in particular, if we go first of all to the decreases. So the interest charges are $329.7 million, and that's servicing the public debt, correct? Okay. And how does that relate to the year before? Do you have that information, or?
I can give you something. That is the amount we're decreasing the forecast by. So if you actually look, so the actual interest charge on public debt from the public accounts in 2013-14 were $28.2 billion in total. So that's kind of the total amount of actual in 13-14. This change in supplementary estimates B, the Department of Finance is indicating that they're decreasing their forecast by $329.7 million, and I'm hoping my friend Marcia has a total for us. Go ahead.
So the total forecast as of this point this year is $26 billion.
Okay. So $26 billion forecast versus last year of, if I can read my own writing here, 28.2. Thank you.
Okay. Now, and that's because of the, I suspect that the yield curves.
It's related to both long-term and short-term interest rates, but it's largely the long-term interest rates are staying low. And so you may recall the Department of Finance, when they put together their budget, they based their interest rate forecasts on a survey of private sector economists, and they redo that periodically. So the latest survey results show they're expecting long-term interest rates to stay lower than we thought, and that's what this is.
Reflected here, yes, thank you. Okay, now I want to move on to the disbursements of the provinces under the softwood lumber agreement. $80 million will be transferred to the provinces, and I'm just wondering the criteria for determining that amount is what is that based on?
Again, this is a decrease, so we're actually forecasting that no money will be transferred to the provinces. So initially, Finance was forecasting that $80 million would be transferred under the agreement, and based on the forecasted price of lumber, we're now forecasting a decrease of 80, which brings us to 0. The criteria basically in play here, it's a formula, and if you follow the U.S. housing market and lumber prices, if the price drops below $355 U.S. per 1,000 board foot, that's when this agreement will kick in.
Okay.
So that's what's driving it. If they looked at the housing market in the U.S., the current prices and the forecasted prices, and they're forecasting that the price will stay above that amount of $355, meaning there'll be no need to actually pay anything out here.
Okay. In the event that it does increase over $355 due to a uptake in U.S. housing,
if it drops below $355, then it's a formula. The government of Canada would basically settle up with the provinces. So this is just their best estimate at the time. The current time is we're forecasting none, but if the price drops, then they'll pay.
Thank you very much. In terms of just moving up, the payments to International Development Association of $41.6 million, and the decision to replace, this is a new way of doing it, as you had indicated, replacing demand notes that are previously used. Any indication of why the change, and was there an issue with the demand notes?
It wasn't a real issue from my perspective, and this is just a bit of speculation. Demand notes are great if you're not really sure if it's going to be used. You put it out there, and if you need it, you need it. If you think if you're pretty certain they're going to require the money, you might as well just flow it. And so from my perspective, this is simpler.
Okay, gotcha. Now I'm also curious about the incentive for the establishment of the Canadian Securities Regulation Regime, the $115 million. So is that $115.8 to run the transition office, or?
No, that's actually that's an interesting question. Those are payments to 2 provinces who have agreed to effectively come on board. So this represents one-time payments to Saskatchewan and New Brunswick, who are now part of this initiative, and so they've basically been funded on a one-time basis to sort of acknowledge that they're now part of this process.
BC, Ontario, and PEI, which had agreed
previously, I believe.
Previously
yes.
paid out.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci, M. Adler. Donc, on revient à Madame Day pour...
We're back to Ms. Day for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question, Mr. Matthews. The TBS have asked for $74.9 million of credit A for out-of-court settlement. A question was asked earlier as to this had to do with Royal LePage, and you replied that the matter was before the courts, so would pass without comment. In the case of our next meeting, I might be in a position to give you more ample information on this matter. End of quote. Now, well, time has passed. Can you talk to us about it now?
To do with Royal LePage, it was, if I recall correctly, the White case we knew what the amount was in Supplementary Estimates A, but it hadn't been quite ratified by the courts yet. So that has now been done, and it relates to the White case, and that matter is now wrapped up.
Pouvez-vous nous dire si ça a coûté le...
Did it cost the amount noted, $74.9 million, as described in Sub A?
Had been agreed upon by the parties, so it was an exact amount.
Est-ce que vous avez prévu d'autres demandes de règlement à la...
Do you foresee any further type of settlements which may currently be before the courts or not?
Items before the courts. The government is actually a very popular thing to do is to sue the government. So am I aware of any at this moment that will be coming back to you for in Supplementary Estimate C? No, I'm not. That being said, there are many lawsuits in play. What I would maybe highlight for the member is in Volume 3 of Public Accounts, they actually publish claims against the Crown. So it's actual payments that are made out for all the settlements. You can get them by department. So it's after the fact, but if it's an area of interest, you can find. So next year, the current year, 2014-15, you would see the White case show up as payments against claims made against the Crown for payments. So it's a good way to sort of track the settlements.
Dites-moi, au niveau du service canadien.
As to the administrative tribunals, 11 organizations, I think, are under that umbrella. I believe that it was supposed to come into effect on November the 3rd, 2014 for that. Did that, in fact, occur?
Now, part of our Supplementary Estimates B, in terms of is the organization actually up and running and providing these services yet? I'm not certain, but it's...
The services are continuing in the organizations that were originally providing them. I understand that the transition is going to be slow, but it's expected to be done by the end of the fiscal year because, as Mr. Matthews said, we are establishing the vote for the new organization in these subs, and the order in council only came out a few weeks ago, so I'd imagine there'll be a lot more work done between now and the end of the fiscal year.
Le budget supplémentaire totalise
The supplementary budget is a $1 vote, I believe, for this tribunal. Is that normal?
Change the vote wording of something or add a new vote, things like that, but there's no actual money required. We can't put $0. There's just the rules of estimates. To basically make it into the Appropriation Act, we need a $1 amount. So if we're changing the wording of a vote, we will use $1 just to affect that change.
Combien de temps il me reste, Monsieur le Président?
Remaining, sir? Thank you. Okay, on another subject, then the F-35s. Can you tell us which firm or which party was hired to give us the objective look as to the purchase of our next fighters?
Well, who was the firm involved? That's a better question for National Defence to answer because I'm not too close to that process.
Par rapport au budget, Madame Santiago.
Well, as to the budget, Ms. Santiago, could you find for us how much it's going to be costing? What's the expertise of that particular thing, and a firm that is, and what's it going to cost us?
Of the review that was done for F-35, and you're curious about the amount of the contract? Is that? I just want to make sure I have the question correct. Name of the firm and the amount of the value of the contract.
Quelle est son expertise?
Yes, what expertise, what salary was paid, and the amount of the contract, the value of the contract.
The contract and the name of the firm. The actual questions around why they were chosen, I think, are probably better answered by D&D, but I'll get the first two for sure.
Merci, Madame D. Le temps est écoulé.
Thank you. Your time has now expired. Mr. Hilliard.
On page 10 of your slides, talks about the incentive for provinces to eliminate taxes on capital. So I assume that means if the provinces do eliminate taxes on capital, they get the funding. Do they get some funding if they only reduce the taxes on capital, or do you know?
My understanding is the arrangement with Finance Canada is, or with the government, is if they eliminate taxes on capital, they receive compensation from the federal government. My understanding is that if they just reduce, there's nothing in play. It's an eliminate. The amounts you're seeing here are for the province of Quebec and the province of British Columbia to acknowledge their elimination of capital taxes. It's $95 million in total. Roughly $90 million went to the province of Quebec and $4.9 million went to the province of BC. I'm going from memory here. I think BC may have received something previously on this amount, but that's my memory.
Okay. And so other provinces before these estimates had already received?
Already received, yes.
Okay. On page 7, it talks about Parks Canada receiving money for improvement to highways, bridges, and dams. Do you know if there were particular projects in mind, or if each particular park needs to apply if they have things in mind, or what's up with that one?
So so from a parliamentary perspective, Parks Canada gets a bucket of funds that they can distribute across various projects. In putting together their request, Parks Canada looks at their current infrastructure, which items are in need of repair, and also what they think they can accomplish during the current fiscal year, because there are limits to what you can do. So this 57.6 request, Parks has an idea of what they will spend it on, which specific projects. Two I can mention for you are the Crow Bay Dam and the Glacier National Park Highway, but there are many others. That being said, I want to make it clear that if circumstances change and project A is not doable, they may have another project lined up to replace it, but the actual request of 57.6 was based on a specific list.
And it's a change from the original?
This is additional funding for this.
Okay. And another question I have is your presentation talks about 63 organizations being covered under these estimates. Why are there some organizations that aren't listed in these?
So thank you for the question. This is directly related to how estimates work. So when we get the main estimates, which is how we start the year, any department that is going to spend money, which is all departments, would be in that list. As the year goes on, if departments get Treasury Board approval to spend new money and indicate they are capable of spending it this year, because we do resource departments year by year, you come into supplementary estimates. And supplementary estimates is our biggest, but it does not mean, there are certain departments that had no items that they were requesting additional funds for, so they're not included here, which just means they're status quo.
And could you also clarify what a horizontal item is and what?
So the horizontal items, and it's the introductory section of the main estimates, is any item where multiple departments are receiving funding to achieve a common outcome. So I'll give you two examples, one on the more complex side and one fairly simple. The remediation of environmental liabilities and ongoing assessment, that involves 9 departments, if I recall correctly. 9, 11? 9, thank you. So it's any department that is a custodian of a site. So Parks Canada could have environmental liabilities, National Defence does. So that's kind of a large effort. Then you've got something as simple as CRA is implementing new tax measures, and they need some IT help, which will be provided by Shared Services Canada. So, a very straightforward program, new tax measures, but there's an IT component that Shared Services Canada will get resources for.
So it's horizontal items are funding that goes to more than one department for the same project.
Same project. And if it's been a keen area of interest of this committee in the past. If you look to the introductory section of the estimates, you will see the list of all the horizontal items and also an indication of whether it's received money before. So the First Nations Water and Wastewater Action Plan has received funding in the past, and you'll get the history.
Merci, Monsieur Le temps est écoulé. Donc,
Thank you very much. Now we're going back to Mr. Easter for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the on page 6 of the slide, in the national defense, does that number include the major shipbuilding contract for the Irving shipyard in Halifax? And if so, where's that at? I mean, my understanding of the project is that there was, by this time, supposed to be ships coming off the line, yet there hasn't been any steel cut, although the Irvings have completely built the yard, the buildings to get the ships built. My concern, and why I raised the question, my concern there is that although this major contract has been let and it's over a number of years, the shipbuilders, if there's delays in terms of the shipbuilding, it throws off their estimates and where their profitability might be. So I'm just wondering where that's at.
So two parts to the question. Excuse me. Is there money in here related to the shipbuilding project on the East Coast with Irving? My understanding is no. Where that project is at, my understanding is that they're continuing to nail down best design before they actually start to cut steel. So I believe those discussions are ongoing. Certainly not an area that I'm an expert in, but that's my understanding is we're still nailing down the design before they actually start cutting steel.
So if the original, I think the original intent was to have at least the first ship off the line by now, and we haven't got any steel. And so the money for some of it wouldn't flow, as I understand it. How's that work?
So this again goes back to Parliament approving money on an annual basis. We have talked about reprofiles here, where a department says, you know what, I initially thought I would spend that money this year, but I'm not going to. D&D will be resourced for those for their expenditures related to those ships when they have a better idea of when the bills will come due. So that's when you'll see the money flowing into D&D's reference levels. That being said, D&D has a fairly large allocation for capital projects, so it's a fairly big chunk of money there. So they may be able to flow some money in advance of coming back for incremental resources, but the estimates themselves will be dependent upon an actual forecast of cash flow for the project.
Yeah. So last question on that point. So in terms of the total expenditure for the product, which I forget, maybe Bernard would know, 28 billion, whatever it is. If we are behind in the time frame, and I'm not 100% sure we are, I'm told we are, then that unspent money wouldn't work like in some departments where the money would lapse and go back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. The money would just move ahead, if I could put it that way.
So if it ever made it into D&D's reference level, so if they actually were going to spend money and said, okay, they get the money, and then they go, no, we're holding now, because it is a year-by-year thing, they would actually have some capacity to reprofile money on their own. But if and this is a theoretical answer, if they needed more money moved from one year to the next, there would be a discussion with the Department of Finance. I think Marcia may want to add something here.
It's no problem. When a department doesn't use all of its appropriation in a year, it actually does revert entirely to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. What happens is that there are mechanisms through the appropriations that allow us to bring in a corresponding amount of money in the following year or whatever year that they actually need the cash in. But there is a conversation with the Department of Finance because it is a new fiscal charge.
That's the detail. Thank you very much. On page 10, 10 of the slide as well, partly related to the question Mr. Hillier asked, incentive for provinces to eliminate taxes on capital, 95 million. Can you explain what that means?
Basically, related to economic development, one of the issues the government has been pursuing is to reduce capital taxes. There's enough, and finance is better positioned to give you details on this, but there's enough evidence that reduced capital taxes stimulates investment. So there's been ongoing discussions between the Department of Finance and the provincial counterparts about eliminating their capital tax. Okay, and if a province eliminates a capital tax, obviously their revenue drops, so we compensate them for that.
Okay, thank you.
Merci, M. Vister.
Thank you.
Donc, de retour à M. Trottier pour 5 minutes également.
Mr. Trottier, back to you. 5 minutes.
That you mentioned in your presentation, trying to understand the mechanics of why you're coming back to Parliament to request some appropriations for them. And the ones that I'd like to focus on are related to research and development. On page I-19 of the estimates themselves, you talk about the funding to support the Centers of Excellence for Commercialization and Research, and there's an appropriation being requested of $20.277 million. Why is it that on something like this, why is there a need to come back to Parliament in Subs B to request additional funds? Because it seems to me there's a program that's been laid out. What happens that you need to request additional funding at this time?
So this funding was not in the main estimates for this organization, if I recall correctly, because they hadn't been back through Treasury Board, and so it just sometimes timing doesn't line up. Treasury Board in the interim has actually approved this program. We know who the award winners are, and these organizations are now in a position to flow those funds, so it's really a timing issue.
So it's a similar issue then with the genomics research, and then also you mentioned the excellence, the Canada Excellence Research Chairs. It's just a timing issue. The program was started sometime, perhaps in 2013,
or even before, yes,
or even before then. Yep. Okay. I want to talk about so horizontal items. Are they inherently more complicated to manage? More complicated because it requires coordination between departments, and therefore it's more difficult to control expenditures?
They're not more complicated from a control perspective because we give each department their chunk of money. You may see partway through the year departments discuss and say, you know what, we need to move money from Department A to Department B, and then you come back here for a transfer. So, you know, we've got many examples of Agriculture and Canadian Food Inspection Agency where they move money between the two organizations to figure out who's best positioned to do something. They're probably more complicated from a delivery perspective because you've got, you know, they're more complex by their nature, and you've got more coordination required. Some are. Others, every department's off just doing their little thing. So if you think about the contaminated sites, you know, National Defence is doing their remediation work and Parks Canada is doing theirs. That's not a coordinated project, but something like CRA and tax measures with Shared Services Canada, they're reliant on the IT services from Shared Services Canada, so you have to make sure that's all coordinated.
Okay, because like the initiative around genomics research, for example, I count 8 different departments doing genomics research: agriculture and agri-food, food inspection, environment, fisheries and oceans, health, NRC, natural resources, Public Health Agency of Canada. So operationally, are those departments actually working together, or do they just get their separate allocations and then they do their own siloed research?
There's discussion up front when they're actually coming forward with the initial proposal. So way back when they would have gone to Cabinet to say, okay, who's doing what and how does this fit together? Once that is done, now we're in the stage of departments just get their money and they do their thing. There is ongoing dialogue about, you know, are we getting results, etc. But at this stage, it's very much each department has a role to play. They'll spend their money.
Okay, and in the history of the estimates and appropriations, are horizontal items a new development?
They're not a new development. They're an increasing trend for certain. You know, the government has moved to things like Shared Services Canada, which gives us, it's a shared services organization, so we have more horizontals. So there's more of them for sure. But secondly, it's also an area where parliamentarians have indicated they weren't happy in the past with the level of information they were getting. They didn't see the horizontal initiatives, and they liked the idea of knowing that there was more than one department involved in this. So it's something we're providing additional disclosure on as well.
So you're saying that it was done in the past, it just wasn't necessarily reported and disclosed as a horizontal item?
Correct.
Okay. Are there more? Oh, sorry.
So I was just going to add that the challenge with horizontal types of initiatives is that some are sort of more easily defined than others. So the way that we present horizontal items in the supplementary estimates, our very specific and practical definition is that these are initiatives where all of these departments show up at the same time at Treasury Board for a very particular initiative. So we can isolate. It's these three departments for commercialization, or it's these 9 for this instance of contaminated sites funding. What's harder are the broader horizontal initiatives, like big themes like Aboriginal programs or public security, and those kinds of things are much more complicated in terms of coordination and reporting to Parliament.
And what's driving the trend towards more horizontal items that you mentioned, Mr. Matthews?
I think two things I would highlight. One is just the nature of government and the projects it's undertaking. There's more partners involved, there's more collaboration is one. And the second, largely driven by some of the efficiencies that we're pursuing, is more centralization and kind of common services organizations. So Shared Services Canada is the best example I can give you of that.
Point of order, Mr.
Merci, Monsieur Trottier. Un point de rappel au règlement, Monsieur.
That's a point of order, Mr. OGGO.
But it's rather disappointing that we come to this meeting this morning to learn that, unfortunately, we won't have you for the full 2 hours, and that you will only be present for the hour, if I'm correct, right? So the opposition would have had plenty of questions to ask you. We would have liked to have had that opportunity to do so. And we'd just like to note our disappointment with regards to that happening. I think there are very few good reasons not to confirm that you'll be here for the full time, and then unfortunately not be able to do that.
Merci. C'est pas un rappel au règlement, mais je prends.
Oh, okay. It's taken under advisement. We won't call it a point of order, but however. So, Mr. Matthews, using the chair's prerogative, I might have a question or two for you myself. On page 10 of your slides, you mentioned the establishment of a Canadian organization of a national association for securities, Canadian securities, in other words, 1.15 million. And this is under statutory expenses. Why would it be statutory rather than a vote if we are creating this new organization or organism? I would have thought that it would have been in the votes and not in the statutory. Do you have an explanation for that? Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question, by the way.
Firstly, this relates to payments being made to provinces directly. So there's 115.8 million here, and these are one-time payments. And so that's money that's flowing directly to the two provinces. Most of the dollars we flow directly to provinces are statutory in nature, so that it's right in the legislation. Not all, but most. If we were to ever get to a stage where we had a federal department, and I'm being hypothetical here, that was a Canadian securities regulator. Now that's hard to imagine because that would likely be an arm's length organization. You would see their operating dollars voted. But the nature of this organization or this initiative is we're paying provinces here, and quite frequently we see legislation that is statutory in nature to flow those dollars. Canadian Health Transfer is a good example. Social transfer. So that's just the background on this. If there is ever a Canadian securities regulator established, or when it is established, I don't expect it will be a government department. I can't imagine how that would work. So I would expect that would be an arm's length organization from the government. But the reason I said your question was interesting, operating dollars for government organizations are voted, and I suspect that's why you were asking the question. But it's just the nature of these payments.
Oui, c'est pour ça que je posais la question, mais vu que...
Yes, in fact, that was why. But if you explain the transfers to provinces, it's crystal clear. That's very good. Mr. O'Connor?
10:45, so I don't know who's talking about a shorter meeting. Are we having a shorter meeting?
Monsieur Matthews est disponible jusqu'à 10h15, 10h20.
Mr. Matthews can be here till 10:15, till 10:20 perhaps. That's why we won't get to 10:45.
I don't think about it.
Mais pour répondre à cette question, je vais consulter Monsieur le greffier.
Let me consult with the clerk.
Comme moi, c'est ce matin qu'on a su que Monsieur...
We only learned this morning that Mr. Matthews was only available to us till 10:20. That's why the notice was. We weren't able to change the notice of motion, the notice of meeting. Well, Mr. Chair, I can be here till 10:30, if you will, but that'll be tops. Well, thank you very much. Same point, Mr. Rabigan? Well, it's still, we called on Mr. Matthews to be here for the entirety of the meeting, and it's Mr. Matthews' lookout to be available for the entire period. I mean, it's parliamentary practice. That's how it works. We're very disappointed. The opposition is disappointed to learn of this at the very last minute. It would be a little bit better if we had known in advance. We might have prepared in consequence. But I see on the other side, too, there's a certain disappointment or concern that is not as forecast. It's unfortunate that he cannot stay, but, there are very few reasonable explanations or excuses to not make oneself available for the entire time. So, leaving a half hour before the meeting's over is not quite right. Well, I've heard what you've said, and perhaps we could invite the witness to come back to finish some of the questions, but I don't think that we can force Mr. Matthews to be here. He has another commitment. I fully understand the concerns of the members here present, but it's 10:15 now, or almost, so unless there are any other questions, we can, in fact, continue for perhaps another round or two of questions. Mr. Matthews has just agreed to stay until 10:30, so we can work it right to 10:30. But are there more questions? All right, we'll continue then with questions. And Ms. Day. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very glad that we can extend this just a little bit, because I have quite a few questions, and we rarely get the opportunity to see you. The budget, this one in any case, this bill is over 400 pages. So my next is for air safety. They're looking for 84.6 million for 1B for non-passenger screening. Now, non-passenger screening, what is that exactly? Is that employees, aircraft crew? Is it baggage? Is it perhaps animals? Can you clarify that for us, please? Yes, thank you for that. In fact, it's for those who do work, let's say the catering service providers, airline staff as well, baggage handlers.
Staff themselves, so anyone who actually works related to the airport, that's non-passenger screening, not animals, but it's the actual staff of the airlines and related support services themselves. So this is directly related to beefing up the screening in those areas.
Et ce sont les services humains.
Human services, what? Yes, it's humans only. People. These didn't exist before? This is new, or what?
In terms of the number of, or an increase in terms of the number of people performing the screening. So it's whether it's related to making sure they are cleared in a more expedient manner so they can get to their jobs, or because there's a desire to improve the quality of the screening. I believe it's both. So that's what you're seeing here.
Pouvez-vous me dire si le Canada est conforme aux nouvelles...
Do you indicate, or do you know if Canada is respecting any of the new standards of ICAO?
of ICAO, but that's certainly not an area I'm an expert in.
There are no at this point. In fact, the funding in these supplementary estimates is in response to the increased standards that came into effect July last year.
Et au niveau des crédits supplémentaires, si j'ai bien compris.
As to supplementary credits, Mr. Matthews, this is not to get more staff for the security screeners, for example, but we're going to screen to a better degree, let's say, some of these people you mentioned before. Will there be any new hiring for screeners?
You don't know, or we're not certain?
I'm not certain.
We're not certain if there's new staff. We can follow up on that if that's of interest.
Est-ce que ce sera possible de recevoir la ventilation?
Very good. Could you give us then a breakdown as to how this 84.6 million will be allocated?
For you in terms of the allocation itself, I believe it's all operating dollars, and I'm going from memory here, but it is all operating.
Yeah, but it's a crown.
It's crown, so it's, yeah. So my understanding is it's operating, but it'd be tough for me to get additional details because it's a crown organization.
Au niveau de pêche et océan Canada, les demandes de
Fisheries and Oceans, 78.8 million, as we can see here, for the fleet renewal for the Canada Coast Guard. This is for the Canadian Coast Guard. Will that be any new projects, or this simply a renewal of the existing fleet? And are there going to be any other unforeseen costs engendered because of it? Well, in fact, both categories might apply. There are some projects that have been put to the design.
Engineering and design studies, and this is for the ships that will be built on the West Coast. We talked about ships on the East Coast earlier. This is the West Coast ships. So that's money for the department itself. There is money in here as well for the upgrade of the shipyard in Vancouver. When we talked about, one of the members spoke about the Irving shipyard on the East Coast and that the upgrades have been made. Well, this is similar work on the West Coast, but it's ongoing. And the third piece here is a life extension of an existing vessel. So the Louis Saint Laurent, which is the heavy-duty icebreaker that the Coast Guard operates, it is going to be extended out to 2021 while we wait for these for other ships to be built. So there's some work required to make sure that the Louis Saint Laurent can actually do the required work, and it needs some upgrades. So that those dollars are here as well.
Pourriez-vous nous parler
Could you tell us a bit more about the the Pacific Coast Integrated Fisheries Program? Do you have a page reference for that? No, well, we don't have the page numbers. But it's with Fisheries Oceans Canada.
Is it 10B?
It's 10B. It's vote 10B. 32.2 million, I believe, is the amount.
It's a program that's intended to help integrate First Nation and Aboriginal fishing enterprises into existing commercial fisheries. And it also supports increased accountability through increased management and enforcement. These initiatives began in budget 2007 and have been sequentially renewed. This particular funding is to support First Nation fisheries, as I mentioned, providing training and continuing to provide for voluntary relinquishment of non-Aboriginal commercial fisheries access. It's also to improve catch monitoring, reporting, and enforcement, focused in BC, but may also be implemented across the country. And finally, to invest in bilateral and multilateral collaborative management processes to improve fisheries management and to address sustainability and conservation.
Merci. Merci pour les réponses, Monsieur O'Connor.
Thank you for those answers. Mr. O'Connor, 5 minutes.
Canadian Air Transport Security Authority they're requesting $84.6 million, and they're basically requesting it to deal with non-passengers. What's that category mean, non-passengers?
Thank you for the question. So that is the airline crew themselves, the baggage handlers, airport staff, so basically anyone associated with the workings of the airline, but who are not passengers. So that's a specific category. My colleague had mentioned that this funding is to help Canada conform to some new international standards in this area in terms of how non-passengers are screened, and so that's what the $84.6 million is for.
It's a bit surprising that we wouldn't have dealt with this already in the past. I mean, we're screening passengers all the time, but we're not screening the crews and everybody else.
It wasn't. No, we were screening the crews and everybody else. But what's at stake here is, I believe, there's been a change to the international standards, and if you want to operate, airlines, international flights, etc., it's important that there be a consistent approach to how this screening is done amongst the various countries. So, as my colleague was saying, this is about conforming to international standards in this area, which I believe have recently changed.
Okay. Transport Canada is requesting $75.9 million, basically for the replacement of MV Princess of Acadia. Where does this project stand now? I mean, is the money flowing, or?
This project, in terms of the money flowing, this actually represents the money flowing. So this is in the appropriation bill. Transport Canada, if it's approved, will receive $75.9 million, so they can actually act on this transaction. And this is to replace a ferry that runs out of Digby, Nova Scotia, which has reached the end of its life or useful life. So there's a replacement required, and that's the money will flow after these supplementary estimates B, so the deal can be finished.
And my final question is on Parks Canada. They're requesting $57.6 million for infrastructure. Is this higgledy-piggledy all over the place, or is it concentrated in certain areas?
This is a specific request for new money. The 57.6 request is based on a list of specific projects, and from a parliamentary perspective, it goes into Parks Canada's reference level. So they have a specific list of projects in mind. I've mentioned two already: the Crow Bay Dam as well as the Highway and Glacier National Park, but there are many. The bulk of their work will get done during certain seasons of the year where it's more favorable to actually do remediation work. So we're actually heading, there's some work they can do over the winter though, so that's what this represents. And I just did want to highlight, if they do run into a delay on one project, they are free to kind of bring, they have other projects as well, so there may be some interplay on the projects, but it was based on an initial list.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Merci. Il reste un petit peu de temps encore.
We have a few minutes left, so perhaps we can keep going with our list. And I have NDP here. Yes, I'll take up my questions list. I didn't realize I might have an opportunity. How much time? 5 minutes, that's it. But that'll be it. Okay, Heritage Canada, if I may. We've already spoken of that. I think they're looking for $65 million at 5B. So multi-year funding for Toronto Community Foundation in order to participate or to allow greater participation to the public. And there are 3 venues I believe were mentioned earlier. So this amount, $65 million, will be spread over how many years?
2015. So the money is required to get these venues in place for those games. So that basically we're looking at the current fiscal year as well as the next fiscal year. I believe there is some funding that will go to the organization for ongoing operations as well. I'm not certain how many years that flows out for, but the bulk of the money is the actual construction piece.
Puis est-ce que c'est possible que
Is it possible that this initiative be renewed in future, do you think?
I would doubt it, because this is a one-time, Toronto's hosting some games, and we're actually, the money's for 3 facilities, the University of Toronto, University of York, as well as the Velodrome in Milton. So that piece is one time, and the operating funding that goes with it, and I'm going from memory here, I think is a little bit of funds there as well. I wouldn't expect that this is ongoing, but that's speculation on my part.
D'accord. Passons aux agences Parc.
Now, if we go to Park Canada agency, they're looking for $57.6 million. And which parks do you think will be receiving these funds? I believe it's for new and remedial work of infrastructure.
For existing repairs and upgrades to existing assets, highways, bridges, and dams. The money is spread across multiple parks. It's not one or two parks, so it is a number of projects. I don't know if I've mentioned two several times, but I don't have any additional examples. But this is not a project that's specific to one or two parks. This is ongoing repair and maintenance of existing infrastructure, so it's across the whole inventory of parks.
So there's no new infrastructure being built with this money?
I can't say there's none. The bulk of it is to repair existing. Now, if you've got an existing asset that's in such disrepair, it makes more sense to replace it with something new. But it's, as far as I understand, this is about replacing and repairing existing infrastructure.
Okay, and there isn't a way of making a distinction between both of those?
I'm not sure how parks would manage that. I mean, they would have plans. I'm not sure if I could get you a list of these are repairs, this is brand new. I don't have that at my disposal, whether the department would or not. Possible.
D'accord. Est-ce que vous pourriez parler peut-être en...
Thank you. Well, perhaps you can discuss with us in general, if you will. You've seen at this committee, for example, a discussion on the process as a whole. In this instance, how did you take into consideration some of the recommendations of the reports? Thank you. We have received a number of recommendations that set to improve the budgetary expenditures of government.
Have been made in response to recommendations by this committee. The upfront piece where you actually get to see the spending of the department in previous years, which was a fairly new addition. Increased or improved disclosure around horizontals would be the second thing I would flag for you. And the third one, and we haven't discussed it here today, is the reports on plans and priorities, which go with the main estimates. The forecast of 3 years of spending out and explanations as to why actual spending was different than forecasted. So those are kind of the three main things I would highlight for you. There are others, but those would be the big three. If I could add a fourth, the database that was produced, which again we haven't discussed today, which is when we first started was called the expenditure database. At the request of this committee, there's a database with spending and it's searchable, authorities, actual spending, etc. It's been expanded to include HR information and other things, so it's now called the InfoBase, and it goes well beyond just financial stuff.
Merci. Merci, M. Rabignan. Donc, on vous remercie.
Thank you very much. We would like to thank our witness, Mr. Matthews, for his attendance this morning and for the very clear information that we've received. We wish you all success in your new duties, and we'd be very happy to meet with your replacement the next time. So, thank you. Have a good day, and if that's it, we'll adjourn and meet again next Tuesday, I believe. We stand adjourned.